My daughter's teacher called me absolutely furious and screaming at the top of her lungs, yelling, "Your daughter got an A," like it was the worst news she could possibly deliver. The words hit me like a cold slap, cutting through any sense of pride I had for my daughter. "No black student has ever scored this high in my 23 years, Ms. Caldwell spat, convinced Imani was a cheat just because she was brilliant and black. Can you imagine? This woman, her AP calculus teacher, was looking me dead in the eye, implying my child was a criminal. My blood ran cold, but I kept my voice steady. "Isn't that good news?" I asked, completely bewildered. She scoffed. "Good news? Well, she must be getting help. My own daughter studies 6 hours every night and she still struggles. Someone's feeding Imani answers." My heart was pounding. She went on, "I've been watching her during tests. She finishes too quickly because she knows the material. That's impossible. These concepts are extremely advanced." I wanted to scream, but I listened. I even had her solve problems on the board today. She got them right, but she must have memorized the solutions beforehand, or she actually understands calculus. The disdain in her voice was palpable. "Anya, I know you want to believe your daughter is gifted. But let's be realistic here. I've separated her from other students, checked her calculator, watched her like a hawk. I can't figure out her system yet, but I will." "Her system?" I wanted to laugh in her face, but a furious wave washed over me instead. "Her system is studying." I finally blurted out. "I've taught hundreds of students," Miss Caldwell countered. "I know when something's not right. She doesn't even ask questions in class." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She doesn't need to." I shot back. "Everyone needs help with calculus. The white and Asian students ask questions constantly. Your daughter sits there pretending she understands everything." The implication was clear. She couldn't fathom a black student excelling without a system. I suggested, "Maybe she actually understands." Miss Caldwell just sighed like I was the naive one. "I'm going to request she take her next test in the principal's office alone. No calculator." "Fine," I said, my voice clipped with anger. Imani, my sweet, brilliant Imani, took that test in isolation. And she aced it. Another A+. The phone rang again. It was Miss Caldwell. "She memorized the test somehow," she declared. My jaw dropped. "How would she do that?" I asked, my disbelief overflowing. "I don't know, but there's no other explanation," she insisted. "I'm changing her to a different test version next time." "Do what you need to do," I said, hanging up, my hands shaking. "Different test version. Another A+. Another angry call. My patience was completely gone. "I'm recommending she be removed from AP Calculus for getting perfect scores due to academic dishonesty," Ms. Caldwell announced, her voice dripping with false concern. "I can't prove it yet, but it's disrupting the other students. They're questioning why they can't score as high." Well, this was it. This was the breaking point. "Maybe," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "because my daughter's smarter than them." She paused. "Anya, that's not helpful. I've had parents of other students complaining. They say, if Imani is not cheating, then I must be giving her special treatment. So either she's cheating or you're helping her cheat." It was an impossible lose-lose. "I would never," I said. "Then the poison, but she must be cheating because she's black." The line was silent for a beat. "I didn't say that," she snapped. "You said no black student has scored this high in 23 years, I reminded her, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. "That's just a fact," she insisted, trying to squirm away. "What happened to the black students who tried?" I pushed. "They struggled like everyone else. Calculus is hard." "Did you accuse them of cheating when they did well?" I pressed. "They didn't do this well," she muttered. "But if they had?" Silence. "Then I need to protect the integrity of my classroom." Protecting the integrity of her classroom? Well, she was protecting her bias. I started attending school board meetings, my gut telling me this wasn't just about Imani. And that's when I uncovered the pattern. Miss Caldwell had complained about 3 other black students in previous years. Chloe Evans, accused of plagiarism in pre-calc, moved to regular math. Leo Miller, accused of copying homework, dropped the class. Noah Green, tested in isolation so many times he developed anxiety he just switched schools entirely. My heart ached for these kids. I met with their parents, Sarah, David, and Noah's mom. We compared notes. The same chilling phrases: doesn't ask questions. Finishes too quickly. No black student has ever. Must be getting help. Is like a script. We went to Principal Davies, but he wouldn't listen. Miss Caldwell is our most experienced math teacher. If she has concerns, they're valid. I stared him down. Her only concern is that my daughter's black and good at math. He blanched. That's a serious accusation. So is accusing my daughter of cheating with no evidence. I retorted. He just mumbled something about her being thorough. Then came the International Math Olympiad qualifier exam that spring. Top scorers from each state compete nationally. It was proctored by external evaluators, filmed. No accusations possible. Imani registered immediately. Miss Caldwell found out, of course, and called me in a panic. She can't take that exam, she shrieked. Why not? I asked, already knowing the answer. She's not ready. It'll hurt her confidence when she fails. I couldn't believe her audacity. Let her try. I forbid it as her teacher, she insisted. You can't forbid standardized tests. I fired back. If she fails, it reflects badly on my teaching, she whined. I thought you said she was cheating? How would her failure reflect on you? I asked, relishing the moment. I just don't think she should take it, she stammered. Monty took it anyway. She scored in the top 5 for our state, the only student from our school to qualify for nationals. The local newspaper wanted to do a story. They interviewed Ms. Caldwell about her star student. Her words in the article felt like a punch to the gut. I always knew Imani was special, she told the reporter. I pushed her hard because I saw her potential. Some teachers might have doubted her, but I never did. I nearly choked on my coffee. Other parents, blinded by the glowing article, started requesting their kids be transferred to Ms. Caldwell's class. The district superintendent, Dr. Evans, called her personally to congratulate her, even mentioning she was being considered for Teacher of the Year. That was the last straw. I forwarded Dr. Evans every single email Ms. Caldwell had sent me. Every angry voicemail where she said Imani must be cheating. Every accusation about getting help. Every claim that no black student had ever scored this high. Every insistence that my daughter couldn't possibly understand calculus on her own. Within an hour, the superintendent's office confirmed receipt. His assistant called to schedule a meeting for the next morning. I spent that evening organizing printed copies of everything, my hands shaking as I sorted through months of documentation. Each email felt heavier than the last, proof of what Imani had endured while I'd been trying to work within the system. At our meeting, Dr. Evans's expression changed dramatically as he read through the emails. His professional interest shifted to visible discomfort, then alarm. He asked permission to forward everything to the district's compliance officer, explaining this fell under their discrimination investigation protocols. I agreed immediately. Brenda Hayes, the compliance officer, called that afternoon. She scheduled a formal interview and explained the investigation would take several weeks. She asked me not to discuss details publicly, and I understood, even though part of me wanted to shout this from every rooftop. Imani came home from school reporting that Miss Caldwell seemed distracted during class, nervous, barely making eye contact. I didn't tell Imani about the investigation yet. I wanted to protect her from disappointment if nothing came of it. Brenda interviewed me for 2 intense hours, recording everything, taking detailed notes about each incident. She specifically asked about the other black students Miss Caldwell had mentioned. I provided contact information for the Evans, Miller, and Green families. Over the next week, Brenda contacted each family. Sarah called me excitedly to report that someone was finally taking their experiences seriously. David, Leo's dad, broke down crying during his interview, explaining how powerless he'd felt watching his son suffer. 3 white parents even came forward, saying their children felt uncomfortable with how Miss Caldwell spoke about black students. Miss Caldwell was placed on paid leave, pending the investigation outcome. A substitute took over her AP Calculus class. Imani reported that the substitute was encouraging and supportive, treating all students with respect. The contrast highlighted just how abnormal Miss Caldwell's behavior had been. The newspaper reporter who wrote the original article contacted the district asking for comment. The district released a brief statement about reviewing concerns regarding a teacher, without naming Ms. Caldwell specifically. Then an anonymous email arrived. Someone claiming to be Ms. Caldwell's former colleague, describing similar patterns with black students over the years that previous administrators had dismissed. This person was afraid to come forward publicly, but wanted me to know this had been happening for a long time. Brenda scheduled a follow-up interview to discuss the anonymous email. I mentioned the white parents and suggested she speak with current and former students directly. The investigation expanded, including dozens of interviews. A clear pattern emerged. Ms. Caldwell treated black students with suspicion while praising white and Asian students for the same achievements. Several students described her making comments about who naturally excels at mathematics. 3 weeks in, Brenda interviewed Ms. Caldwell. According to the compliance report summary I received later, Ms. Caldwell defended her actions as maintaining academic standards, insisting she treated all students equally. Utter delusion. The Math Olympiad national competition happened while the investigation continued. Imani traveled with the state team to compete. She performed well, though didn't place in the top 10 nationally. But being around other mathematically gifted students who respected her abilities helped heal some of the damage from Ms. Caldwell's treatment. The school board held a closed session to review preliminary findings. Sarah, David, and I attended the public comment period beforehand. Each of us spoke for 3 minutes about our children's experiences, our voices shaking with emotion. The board didn't make immediate decisions but scheduled a follow-up session. The board president acknowledged the investigation revealed concerning patterns that required careful consideration. Ms. Caldwell's lawyer sent a letter threatening legal action if she was terminated. The letter argued her teaching methods were protected by academic freedom and that the investigation was biased. But the district's legal team reviewed the evidence and determined the discrimination case was strong enough to withstand challenge. Still, Imani struggled with anxiety as the school year wound down. She had nightmares about being accused of cheating. He felt like she had to prove herself constantly. My heart broke watching her. I found her a therapist who specialized in helping students of color process experiences with racism in educational settings. The therapy helped Imani articulate feelings she'd been suppressing all year. She admitted she'd started doubting her own abilities because Miss Caldwell's accusations were so persistent. Hearing her say this broke my heart all over again, and it strengthened my resolve to see this through. 4 weeks after the investigation began, Brenda completed her report and submitted it to the superintendent with recommendations. She found substantial evidence of discriminatory treatment based on race. She recommended formal disciplinary action, including mandatory training and probationary status. Dr. Evans scheduled another meeting with me to discuss the findings before making them public. He looked genuinely remorseful. He acknowledged the district failed these students by not investigating the pattern earlier. He apologized directly for the harm caused to Imani and the other families. He explained Ms. Caldwell would face a formal reprimand, mandatory bias training, loss of her AP calculus assignment, and 2 years probationary status with regular classroom observations. She wouldn't be fired due to tenure protections and union contract requirements, but her career advancement was effectively ended. I felt conflicted about the outcome. Part of me wanted Ms. Caldwell fired completely. But Dr. Evans assured me the probationary status meant any future complaints would result in immediate termination proceedings. The Teacher of the Year nomination? Withdrawn. The district issued a formal letter to Ms. Caldwell's personnel file, documenting the discriminatory pattern. This became part of her permanent employment record and would follow her if she ever tried to transfer to another district. The school board voted to implement new policies, requiring documentation of academic integrity concerns, mandatory bias training for all teachers, and a formal process for students and families to report discriminatory treatment without fear of retaliation. They even established a review committee to examine historical discipline and academic tracking data for racial disparities, reporting findings annually. Sarah, David, and I met with the superintendent to discuss how the new policies would be enforced. He committed to quarterly public reports on implementation progress. The newspaper ran a follow-up story about the investigation outcome and policy changes. This time they interviewed us about our advocacy. We spoke carefully about holding institutions accountable while protecting our children's privacy. Several teachers reached out privately to thank us for speaking up. They said they'd witnessed Ms. Caldwell's behavior but didn't know how to address it. Their validation felt important, even though I wish they'd spoken up sooner. Imani finished the school year with straight A grades, including her A+ in AP Calculus under the substitute teacher. She took the AP exam and scored a 5, the highest possible score, providing yet another external validation of her abilities. Ms. Caldwell submitted a brief written apology as part of her disciplinary agreement. It was short, didn't really acknowledge the specific harm she caused. It felt empty, like words written to satisfy a requirement rather than genuine remorse. I read it once and put it in a drawer. I didn't share it with Imani because it would have been more hurtful than healing to see such a hollow gesture after everything she'd endured. Summer arrived and Imani enrolled in a mathematics program at a nearby university for gifted high school students. I drove her to campus that first morning and watched her walk into the building, backpack slung over her shoulder. She turned back once to wave at me, smiling wider than I'd seen in months. When I picked her up that afternoon, she talked nonstop about the problems they'd worked on, the other students in her class. She made friends with kids who shared her passion for math. Kids who understood what it felt like to see patterns in numbers and get excited about proofs. The environment celebrated her abilities rather than questioning them. He came home energized instead of drained. August brought the launch of the district's bias training program. All teachers had to complete it before the new school year started. The curriculum specifically addressed assumptions about student abilities based on race and the harm caused by unexamined biases. The training included case studies that looked very familiar, though names were changed. I wondered if teachers recognized the patterns from their own schools. Sarah called me one afternoon in late August. Chloe had decided to return to advanced math classes for her senior year. She felt more confident that the new policies would protect her. Sarah's voice shook with emotion as she told me. This felt like a meaningful victory, even though Chloe had lost 2 years of advanced coursework she could never get back. David called a few days later with different news. Leo chose to stay in regular math and focus on other subjects where he felt more confident. David respected that decision. Not every student wants to return to the environment where they were harmed. That's valid. Leo found his passion in history and literature instead and was thriving. Noah's family decided not to participate beyond their initial interview. They chose to move forward at his new school rather than revisit trauma. I understood their choice, even though part of me wished we'd had their voices as part of the public record. Sometimes healing means letting go rather than fighting. Imani's senior year began with a different AP calculus teacher, Mr. Henderson. He treated her with respect and encouragement from day one. He called on her in class without suspicion. He praised her work without surprise. She was still processing anxiety from the previous year, though. Therapy continued to help her separate Ms. Caldwell's racism from her own worth and abilities. Some days were harder than others. The district's Data Review Committee released its first report in September. The numbers showed significant racial disparities in AP course enrollment and advanced tracking decisions. Black and Latino students were underrepresented in advanced programs, even when they had similar test scores and grades as white and Asian students. The report recommended policy changes to address how students got identified for advanced programs and how academic integrity concerns got documented. The data made visible what families like ours had experienced for years. The district invited me to join their Equity Advisory Committee as a parent representative. The invitation came in an email from Dr. Evans himself. The committee met monthly to review policies and make recommendations. I accepted despite the time commitment. The work of changing systems is ongoing and requires sustained attention from people willing to push for accountability. I couldn't fix everything, but I could keep showing up. Ms. Caldwell transferred to teaching regular geometry classes at a different high school in the district. She moved away from advanced students and got regular administrative observations. Some parents at her new school expressed concern when they learned about the investigation. The district maintained they were monitoring her closely. I wondered if close monitoring would be enough or if she'd find new ways to harm students when people stopped watching. Imani started working on college applications in September, spending weekends at the kitchen table with her laptop open to application portals. She wrote essay after essay about her passion for mathematics, but the words felt incomplete without acknowledging what she'd survived to get here. The first draft avoided mentioning Ms. Caldwell entirely, focusing only on her love of problem-solving and abstract thinking. She showed it to me and asked if it felt honest. I told her the truth matters even when it's hard to write about. She started over, this time addressing how she'd learned to advocate for herself when authority figures questioned her abilities based on race rather than evidence. The essay described studying 6 hours every night not just to learn calculus, but to prove she deserved to be in that classroom. It explained how being accused of cheating taught her that excellence sometimes requires defending yourself against people who refuse to see your worth. Several months later, after acceptances started arriving, admissions officers from 3 different universities mentioned her essay specifically during scholarship interviews. They said her resilience and self-advocacy impressed them as much as her perfect grades and test scores. One told her that many students face discrimination, but few developed the courage to name it clearly and keep pushing forward anyway. The following spring, our state's Math Olympiad team performed better than expected at the national competition. 2 students placed in the top 20, and the program received increased funding and support from the state education department. Imani volunteered to mentor younger students interested in competition mathematics, meeting with them twice a month to work through practice problems and competition strategies. She told me it felt important to create the supportive environment she wished she'd had from the beginning. The younger students looked up to her, asking questions without fear of being judged or accused. She encouraged them to trust their abilities and speak up when they knew the answer. Watching her help a nervous freshman work through a complex proof, I saw her transform pain into purpose. The mentoring gave her a way to take something harmful and use it to help others avoid similar experiences. 3 months into the new school year, Brenda called me on a Tuesday afternoon. The district compliance office had received 2 complaints about Ms. Caldwell from parents at her new school. Both described concerns about how she spoke to students of color in her geometry classes. One parent reported Ms. Caldwell questioning whether their son really understood the material despite his consistent test scores. Another described Ms. Caldwell expressing surprise that their daughter could explain a geometric proof so clearly. Brenda explained that the probationary status meant these complaints triggered an immediate investigation rather than being dismissed or delayed. She assured me the new families would receive support and that Ms. Caldwell's classroom practices were being observed more carefully. Brenda's call reminded me that our advocacy had created accountability mechanisms that protected other families. The pattern we documented followed Ms. Caldwell to her new position, making her behavior visible to administrators who might otherwise have dismissed individual complaints. The system wasn't perfect, but it was better than before when families faced discrimination alone, without institutional memory or support. I thanked Brenda for keeping me informed and asked her to let the new families know they weren't alone in this experience. She promised to connect them with resources and ensure the investigation proceeded thoroughly. The thick envelope from Imani's Top Choice University arrived on a Friday afternoon in December. She opened it at the kitchen table with shaking hands, pulling out the acceptance letter and scholarship offer. The letter specifically mentioned her demonstrated excellence in mathematics and her math Olympiad performance. The scholarship covered full tuition plus a stipend for books and research opportunities. Imani read the letter twice, then looked up at me with tears running down her face. These were happy tears, relief tears, validation tears. She'd worked so hard for this moment, studying through doubt and accusation and isolation. The acceptance proved what I'd always known, but what Miss Caldwell tried to deny. Imani belonged in advanced mathematics. She deserved to be there. Her abilities were real and recognized by people who actually understood mathematical excellence. I took the acceptance letter to a frame shop the next day and chose a simple black frame with a white mat. The framed letter went on the living room wall where we'd see it every day. It served as a physical reminder that Imani's abilities were never in question, despite Ms. Caldwell's attempts to undermine her confidence and reputation. The external validation from a prestigious university felt like the final word on who was right about Imani's capabilities. Every time I walked past that frame, I felt grateful we'd fought back instead of accepting Ms. Caldwell's judgment. The letter represented more than college acceptance. It represented Imani's resilience and our family's refusal to let racism define our daughter's future. The school board recognized Imani at their January public meeting for her math Olympiad achievement and college acceptance. They presented her with a certificate and took photos for the district website. After the public meeting ended, 3 board members approached me privately to apologize for not addressing the concerns about Ms. Caldwell sooner. They acknowledged the district should have investigated the pattern years ago when the first complaints emerged. Their apologies felt genuine, even though they couldn't undo the harm Imani and the other students experienced. One board member admitted she'd heard rumors about Ms. Caldwell's treatment of black students, but hadn't pushed for investigation because Ms. Caldwell had seniority and strong support from some parents. She said, "Our advocacy changed how the board thinks about responding to discrimination complaints." Chloe received college acceptances to strong programs in February, including admission to the State University's Honors College. Sarah called me crying happy tears when the acceptances arrived. Chloe had rebuilt her confidence in advanced coursework during her senior year, proving to herself that she belonged in challenging classes. Sarah and I celebrated together over coffee, grateful that our daughters were moving forward despite the obstacles placed in their paths. We talked about how different things might have been if we'd fought back years earlier, but we also acknowledged that we did what we could when we understood the full pattern. Our daughters were succeeding now, and that mattered more than dwelling on what we couldn't change about the past. The district's new Academic Integrity Documentation Policy released its first annual report in March. The data showed concerns were being raised more equally across racial groups now that teachers had to provide specific evidence rather than relying on feelings about who seemed capable. Before the policy, Black and Latino students received academic dishonesty referrals at 3 times the rate of white and Asian students, despite similar grade distributions. After implementation, the referral rates became nearly equal across groups. The data proved the policy was working to reduce discriminatory referrals. Teachers couldn't simply accuse students without documentation anymore. The numbers made visible what families like ours had experienced for years, but couldn't prove without systematic data collection. Ms. Caldwell submitted her resignation effective at the end of the school year. She cited personal reasons in her letter, but everyone involved in the investigations understood she was leaving rather than continue teaching under probationary observation. The district accepted her resignation without protest. She left teaching entirely instead of trying to transfer to another district where her record would follow her. Some people might say we drove a dedicated teacher out of the profession, but I knew we held an educator accountable for harming students over decades. The resignation felt like incomplete justice, but more accountability than most discriminatory teachers ever face. The high school posted job openings for 2 new math teachers in early summer, and the hiring committee included parent representatives for the first time in the district's history. I served on that committee alongside 3 other parents, and we asked every candidate specific questions about supporting students of color in advanced classes. We asked how they'd respond to a high-achieving Black student, what they knew about culturally responsive teaching, whether they'd ever challenged their own biases about who belongs in advanced math. Some candidates gave textbook answers that sounded rehearsed. Others admitted they'd never thought much about race in teaching, which at least felt honest. 2 candidates stood out because they talked about specific training they'd completed and actual classroom experiences where they'd worked to make sure all students felt they belonged. The committee hired both of them. One had taught in a diverse urban district for 7 years and ran a summer math program specifically for underrepresented students. The other had completed a master's degree focused on equity in STEM education and talked passionately about breaking down barriers to advanced coursework. Neither had Miss Caldwell's decades of experience. But they had something more important. They believed all students could excel at math regardless of race. Registration for Imani's senior year AP Calculus class showed something I'd never seen before. 12 Black students enrolled. The previous year, Imani had been one of 3. The year before that, the class had 2 Black students total. Families who'd kept their kids in regular math because they didn't trust how advanced classes worked were willing to try again. Parents told me they felt safer sending their children into AP Calculus, knowing Ms. Caldwell was gone and the new teachers had equity training. Seeing those enrollment numbers felt like watching something shift, not fixed but moving in a better direction. Imani met some of the other Black students during summer orientation, and she came home talking about how different it felt to not be one of only a few in the room. She said it made her realize how isolated she'd felt the previous year, even though she'd never let herself think about it much at the time. The district invited me to speak at a parent meeting about advocacy in September, and I almost said no because public speaking makes me nervous. But Sarah convinced me that other families needed to hear what we'd learned. The meeting room held about 50 parents from schools across the district, and I stood at the front with printed copies of the timeline I'd created tracking Ms. Caldwell's accusations. I told them to document everything in writing, save every email, take notes after every phone call with dates and times, record what was said in meetings if the district allowed it. I explained how building the coalition with Chloe's and Leo's families had made the pattern undeniable in ways a single complaint never could. I emphasized that administrators often dismiss individual concerns but have a harder time ignoring multiple families telling the same story. I talked about being persistent, even when principals and superintendents act like you're overreacting or being difficult. I said the system counts on parents giving up, so refusing to give up is the most powerful thing you can do. Several parents took notes. A few wiped their eyes when I described how long Imani had endured Ms. Caldwell's treatment before we understood the full pattern. After the presentation, parents lined up to talk to me, and what they shared made clear that Ms. Caldwell was just one example of a much bigger problem. A mother from the middle school described her son being tracked out of advanced English despite high test scores, with teachers insisting he'd be more comfortable in regular classes. A father from the elementary school talked about his daughter being disciplined more harshly than white students for the same behavior. A parent from another high school mentioned their child being discouraged from taking AP chemistry because the teacher didn't think they were ready, despite having straight A's in previous science classes. Same patterns, different teachers, different schools, different subjects. The conversations lasted over an hour past the scheduled meeting end time. We exchanged contact information and talked about staying connected to address issues as they came up. I drove home that night understanding that the fight with Ms. Caldwell had been one battle in a war that wouldn't end anytime soon. The work of changing systems required constant attention from people willing to push back against discrimination wherever it appeared. Graduation day arrived in late May with clear skies and temperatures in the 70s. Imani finished as valedictorian with a perfect 4.0 GPA, and the school asked her to give the graduation speech. She spent 2 weeks writing and revising it, and she let me read drafts but made her own decisions about what to include. The final speech talked about perseverance when people doubt you, about proving yourself through excellence, about not letting other people's limited expectations define what you're capable of achieving. She never said Ms. Caldwell's name, but everyone who knew the story understood exactly who she meant when she discussed pushing through situations where teachers questioned whether she belonged in challenging classes. She talked about the importance of having people who believe in you, and she thanked me and her other supporters by name. Her voice stayed steady through the whole speech, strong and clear. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded for almost a minute. I cried watching her up there in her cap and gown, thinking about everything she'd survived to reach that moment. After the ceremony, Several of Imani's teachers found her in the crowd to offer congratulations. Her chemistry teacher hugged her and said she'd been an absolute joy to teach. Her English teacher told her the college she was attending was lucky to have her. Her new calculus teacher, Mr. Henderson, said Imani had set a standard of excellence that inspired the whole class. The math department chair pulled Imani aside and apologized for not recognizing Ms. Caldwell's pattern sooner, saying the department should have protected students better. Each conversation seemed to help balance out some of the damage from the teacher who'd spent a year trying to tear Imani down. Support from educators who actually believed in her abilities mattered, even if it couldn't erase what Ms. Caldwell had done. Sarah, David, and I sat together in the bleachers, watching the graduates walk across the stage to receive their diplomas. Chloe walked with her head high, wearing the gold honor cords she'd earned. Leo walked with a huge smile, waving to his family. Imani walked with quiet confidence, shaking hands with the principal and superintendent, who'd eventually listen to our concerns. We talked about how different things might have been if we'd given up, if we'd accepted the district's initial dismissals, if we'd let Ms. Caldwell continue her pattern unchallenged. Our advocacy hadn't fixed everything. The system was still far from where it needed to be. But we'd protected future students from experiencing what our children had endured. We'd created accountability where none existed before. We'd proven that parents working together could force institutions to respond to discrimination they'd rather ignore. That felt like something worth celebrating even while acknowledging how much work remained. The summer before college, Imani got a job as a teaching assistant in a mathematics program for middle school students of color. The program ran for 6 weeks at a community center, focusing on building confidence and skills in students who'd been told they weren't math people. Imani worked with small groups, helping them solve problems and showing them that making mistakes was part of learning. She came home energized most days, talking about breakthroughs students had or funny things kids said. One evening, she told me that helping younger students see themselves as mathematicians felt like taking something painful and transforming it into something with purpose. She said Miss Caldwell had tried to make her doubt her abilities, but now she could use her experience to help other students avoid that same doubt. She could be the encouraging voice she'd needed during her junior year. In early August, I received a message through social media from Noah Green's mother. She said Noah was thriving at his new school and had decided to major in computer science in college. He'd rebuilt his confidence in his abilities and was excited about his future in a technical field. She thanked me for pursuing accountability with the district, even though their family had chosen not to participate actively in the investigation. She wrote that it had helped them heal to know someone fought back against Ms. Caldwell, that our advocacy had validated their decision to remove Noah from that toxic situation, that seeing consequences for Ms. Caldwell's actions had given them closure they didn't know they needed. I wrote back thanking her for reaching out and saying I was glad Noah was doing well. Her message reminded me that the impact of holding Ms. Caldwell accountable extended beyond just the families who'd been directly involved in the investigation. The district's Equity Advisory Committee met every month through the fall, and I brought research articles showing how teacher recommendations for gifted programs reflected racial bias more than actual student ability. The committee reviewed data from 3 neighboring districts that had switched to multiple measures for identifying talented students, and the results showed significant increases in Black and Latino enrollment in advanced classes. We drafted a proposal requiring schools to use standardized assessments, student work portfolios, and parent input alongside teacher recommendations. The school board reviewed our proposal in December and voted to implement the new identification process starting the following year. The policy wouldn't help Imani, but it would protect younger students from being overlooked because teachers couldn't imagine them succeeding. Imani packed boxes in her room while I sat on her bed watching. She folded clothes and sorted through textbooks, deciding what to keep and what to donate. I asked what she'd learned from everything with Ms. Caldwell. She stopped packing and sat next to me. She said the experience taught her that doing excellent work was the best way to answer people who doubted her. But she also learned she shouldn't have to work twice as hard just to be seen as half as good because of her skin color. She said proving herself over and over got exhausting, and future students shouldn't have to go through what she went through. Her voice stayed steady, but I saw how much the year had cost her. I told her she was right about both things. Excellence mattered, but the system needed to change so Black students didn't face constant suspicion and doubt. I explained that the work of fixing these problems would continue long after she left for college, and progress happened slowly through policy changes and accountability measures. Imani picked up a calculus textbook and ran her fingers over the cover. She said she wanted to come back during college breaks and mentor high school students, especially kids who looked like her and needed to see someone who'd made it through. She wanted to create the supportive environment she wished had existed from the start, where students could focus on learning instead of defending themselves. A thick envelope arrived from the new AP Calculus teacher 6 days before move-in day. I opened it while Imani finished breakfast, and inside was a handwritten letter on the school stationery. The teacher thanked Imani for her leadership in class and her willingness to help other students understand difficult concepts. The letter described how Imani's presence had raised the level of discussion and made the class better for everyone. The teacher wrote that Imani's combination of skill and generosity represented the best of what education could be. Imani read the letter twice, then put it in her college folder with her acceptance materials. The dorm parking lot overflowed with cars and families on move-in day. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs while other students and parents did the same. Imani's roommate arrived an hour after we did, and within 10 minutes they were talking about problem sets and proof techniques. The roommate was also studying mathematics and had competed in math competitions throughout high school. They compared favorite theorems and debated different approaches to solving integration problems. Watching Imani, excited and confident about her academic future, I felt grateful that Ms. Caldwell's attempts to crush her spirit had failed. Imani belonged here, surrounded by people who celebrated her abilities instead of questioning them. My phone buzzed 3 days into the semester with a text from Imani. She just finished her first college calculus class and wanted to tell me about the professor. She wrote that he was brilliant and encouraging, treating every student like a capable mathematician regardless of their background. She described how he asked challenging questions and seemed genuinely excited when students engaged with the material. Her final text said, "Learning was supposed to feel like this." And I knew that despite the painful detour with Ms. Caldwell, Imani had arrived exactly where she belonged, ready to excel without anyone questioning whether she deserved to be there. What a journey, right? It was exhausting, heartbreaking, but ultimately so worth it. Have any of you faced something similar where you had to fight for your child against bias or injustice? What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.